Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from Rao's IAS Study Cell. Hello and welcome to the Daily News Simplified, an analysis of the Hindu newspaper from UPSC perspective. Today we will discuss the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 21st July 2020. And the articles that we will discuss today are displayed on your screen. So let us start our discussion. Now, this article on page number 9 is related to the views expressed by the External Affairs Minister of India in a recent interview. And in this, he has talked about the global shifts that are happening in the geopolitics of the world. And accordingly, what role should be played by India and what are the cautions that India needs to take in its functioning in the global geopolitics. So the views expressed by the foreign minister are important for us from General Studies paper 2 point of view under the topic international relations. Now in the coming days you will find a lot of editorials and articles in the newspapers related to this interview of the External Affairs Minister of India and various criticisms and point of views on the views expressed by the foreign minister. So in this article we will restrict ourselves to the views which have been expressed by the foreign affairs minister in this regard. And in the coming days, we'll be discussing the editorials and the articles which appear related to this interview of the External Affairs Minister of India. So the Foreign Affairs Minister has expressed his views on changing geopolitics, the present geo-economy, and also on the neighborhood of India. And on the changing geopolitics, the Foreign Affairs Minister has expressed that India will not be a part of any alliance and would maintain strict neutrality. Now we note that there have been talks that India has been spearheading alliances which are targeting the presence of China in the Indian Ocean region. So in this regard, the External Affairs Minister has clarified that India will not be a part of any alliance and would maintain strict neutrality. Further, we note that geopolitics is witnessing shifts with China being more assertive and United States of America shrinking its global role. Further, we note that geopolitics is witnessing shifts with China being more assertive and United States of America shrinking its global role. And the shrinking role of United States of America in the world geopolitics is witnessed by its withdrawal from the UNESCO, the World Health Organization, and also the Paris Climate Deal. So in this regard, the Foreign Affairs Minister has expressed that these shifts are opening up spaces for middle powers like India, Japan, and the European Union and others. Further, the shrinking role of USA in global politics has allowed many other countries to play more autonomous roles. Further, the shrinking role of USA does not affect India much because we were never a part of an alliance system and we will never be a part of any alliance system. Now you might be knowing that the world was divided into two alliance systems after the end of Second World War, and which was famously known as the Cold War, in which one alliance was led by the countries which followed the capitalist system, while the other alliance was led by the countries which followed the communist system. And the capitalist system was headed by the United States of America, and the lead role in the communist system was being played by the USSR. However, we note that during the Cold War period, India maintained neutrality through its principle of the non-alignment. And accordingly, the Foreign Minister of India has clarified that India was never a part of any alliance system and even in the future it will never be a part of any alliance system. Further, due to the shrinking role of USA in the global politics, the Foreign Affairs Minister has said that countries which depended more on the United States of America are finding that they have to take a call themselves on many issues that affect the world. Further, regarding India's role in this changing geopolitical scenario, the Foreign Minister has said that India must now take more risks as the world is expected to take a more proactive stance on the big issues of the day, which can include connectivity, maritime security, terrorism, climate change, etc. Further, expressing the views on the global economy, the Foreign Affairs Minister has said that the world is heading towards a more protectionist economic system. And we note that there is an ongoing trade war between China and America, and the global interconnectedness of the economy is taking a backseat due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And talking about the free trade agreements, the Foreign Affairs Minister has said that the FTAs that India entered into over the years have not been able to largely serve the country's economy well in terms of building its capacities. So the foreign minister has said that the free trade agreements have not led to the development of capacity building in India related to the Indian economy, and that has not served the Indian economy very well. And accordingly, the foreign minister says that there are ways of engaging the world which do not necessarily have to free trade agreement centric. So, in short, the Foreign Affairs Minister has said that there is a need to view beyond the free trade agreement paradigm in the engagement with global economy. Further, talking about the neighborhood of India, where we have seen that India is witnessing problems because of the assertiveness of China, etc., the Foreign Minister has said that it is a complex neighborhood and India is often like a punching bag, and creation of structural linkages could address the problem of volatility which has resulted by the domestic politics of several neighboring countries of India. So these are the views expressed by the Foreign Minister of India regarding the changing geopolitics and what role India can play in such a scenario. Further, he has also expressed the views on India's economic engagement with the world and also on the neighborhood problems that India is facing. Now, in the coming days, we'll be seeing more number of articles and editorials related to the views expressed by the Foreign Minister of India. So we will discuss them as and when they appear in the newspaper. With this, let's take up the next news article now. Now, in this article on page number 7, the author has discussed an important step towards food security and nourishment of the population of India. And we all know that due to the COVID-19 pandemic, lack of access to food has driven millions of people to their native villages during the lockdown period. And to alleviate this, the Prime Minister of India had announced the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana. And under this, the government would provide 5 kg of grains and 1 kg of chickpea monthly to about 800 million beneficiaries across the country. Alongside, the Prime Minister has also focused on One Nation, One Ration Card scheme to improve the access to subsidized grains for migrant workers. However, the author is skeptical that these measures are welcome, but these may fall short of reaching all sections of the vulnerable populations of India. And as such, he has suggested or recommended the community kitchen approach, which would provide food security for migrant workers. It would create jobs and will also help save the fiscal resources for the government of India. So, in this discussion, we will focus on two important aspects. First is that what are the reasons as to why the subsidized grains are not a sufficient solution to ensure the nourishment of Indian population? And how will the community kitchens be better in serving the purpose of food security and nourishment of the population, and especially the issues that we have witnessed during the lockdown period in the COVID-19 pandemic period. So this can be a very important aspect for us from the General Studies paper 2 point of view under the topic social justice. So let us look at all these points in detail. Now, why are the subsidized food grains not sufficient for ensuring the food security and nourishment of all the vulnerable sections of the Indian population? Now, first reason is that most of the migrant workers do not live with their families. And secondly, most of them do not cook their meals on their own. And a significant number of these migrant populations rely on roadside vendors and dhabas to ensure their food security, etc. And we note that the migrant population is not able to easily access the fuel for cooking the food or the food grains which have been provided under the various programs by the government of India. Also, during this pandemic, we have seen that the roadside vendors and dhabas have not been working to their full capacity. And as such, it will become difficult for the migrant workers to access the readily available food at affordable prices. And as such, the author has suggested that the solution to make the food affordable for these migrant populations lies in the community canteens. And we note that more than 10 states are running these community canteens. First are the Amma canteens that are running in Tamil Nadu and the Indira canteens that are running in Karnataka. So these are few examples of community kitchens or community canteens. Now, as we have seen that the author has suggested the community canteens instead of the subsidized food grains, let us look at what are the issues that affect the functioning of the community canteens. Now, most of these canteens rely on continuous government support for their sustenance. and accordingly, meals are usually priced at unsustainably low prices, for example, rupees 5 to 10 per plate. So, the author suggests that such canteens could be made operationally self sustainable by pricing the nutritious meal at rupees 15 to 20 per plate, that is, by minimally increasing the price from the presently low prices of rupees 5 to 10 per plate. So, what should be the mode of starting these community canteens across India? So, initially, the central government should extend the initial capital support for starting of these community canteens. And the implementation should be at the state level and should be led by urban local bodies or municipal corporations. And this should be done in collaboration with private entities and service providers. So after this, let us look at what are the advantages of these community canteens over the subsidized food grains which are being provided under the various government schemes. So the first benefit is that of cost saving for the government of India. So according to an analysis which has been done by the authors, it has been suggested that these community canteens are cost effective as compared to the subsidized food grains which are being provided by the government of India. So this will help in reducing the expenditure of the government of India under various subsidized food grains programs, and this will help in directly providing food security and nourishment to the vulnerable populations of the India. Further, besides being a cost saving initiative for the government of India, there are other benefits also. First is that it will lead to accelerated job growth in this section. And the community canteens could also contribute to jobs, growth, and sustainability. Further, it could help in improving the India's nutritional status, and these canteens would help in bridging the nutritional gap among the poor urban workers. Further, this will also help in shifting the agricultural production. Now, according to the authors, if these canteens incorporate low cost, nutritious, and environmentally sustainable food items, for example, the coarse grains, which could include the millets, sorghum, etc., these canteens would create demand signals for the farmers to diversify their crops and focus on sustainably harvested produce. So, this will also help in shifting the agricultural production for the farmers, which can be beneficial for them and will also be an indication for the demand of the kind of food grains that is there in the market. So, according to authors, a renewed approach to community kitchens or community canteens would not only achieve nutritional security for migrant workers but would also create new jobs, save fiscal resources, and support economic growth and promote sustainable diets and agriculture. So these are few points that have been highlighted by the authors in this regard regarding the community canteens as compared to the subsidized food grains which are being provided by the government of India under various schemes. With this, let's take up the next news article now. Now, this article on page number 1 is related to the issue of vaccine development to counter the COVID-19 disease. And the scientists at the Oxford University are claiming that their experimental coronavirus vaccine has started to prompt a protective immune response in hundreds of people who were administered with this vaccine shot. And the scientists have said that their experimental vaccine has produced a dual immune response in people who are aged between 18 to 55. Now we note that this is a developing story and has been discussed in previous DNS videos also. So what we'll do is that we will learn some basics about this vaccine. Secondly, in which phase the trial has been completed and what the developers have claimed and what is the future of this vaccine. So this Oxford team's vaccine was developed by altering the genetic code of the COVID-19 virus. And this is a very different way of developing a vaccine as compared to the classical method, which uses a weakened version of the pathogen to trigger an immune response. So how is this vaccine different? So it has been created by altering the genetic code of the COVID-19 virus. Now these early trials have been termed as the phase 1 trial, and under this the experts have also looked for what is the kind of immune response that is provoked when the candidates are administered with the vaccine. Now in the DNS of 6th July 2020, we have discussed the procedure that a candidate vaccine has to go through to become a successful or acceptable vaccine. And in that discussion, we have taken care of all the major 3 phases of a trial of vaccine. So do go through this video and try and understand the phases that a vaccine candidate has to go through to become an acceptable vaccine. So now what are the developers of this vaccine claiming? First is that they have observed good immune response in almost every person who was administered with this vaccine. Secondly, this vaccine was able to generate neutralizing antibodies which are key to blocking the infection. And the scientists claim that the vaccine is producing a comparable level of antibodies to those people who have recovered from a COVID 19 infection. Further, this vaccine is causing a reaction in the body's T cells which help to fight off the coronavirus. So again, this vaccine has been prompting response from these T cells in our bodies. And accordingly, this will help in providing the protection against the coronavirus. So now what are the next few steps that this vaccine candidate needs to pass through so that it becomes an acceptable vaccine? So now larger trials will be evaluated for the effectiveness of this vaccine, and it will involve 10,000 people in UK as well as some participants in South Africa, Brazil, etc. are already underway. Further, another big trial of this vaccine will start in the United States of America, and it will enroll about 30,000 people for the clinical trials of this vaccine. So the scientists have now said that by the end of this year, they will have sufficient data to decide if the vaccine can be adopted for mass vaccination campaigns against the COVID-19 disease. Now, vaccine development is one of the important current affairs in the times of COVID-19 pandemic. So accordingly, we are keeping a track of the development of vaccine of the COVID-19 disease. So with this, let's take up the next news article now. Now, this article on page number 6 is related to the issue of privatization of railways. And in this regard, the Ministry of Railways had recently invited requests for qualification for operation of passenger trains by private operators in PPP mode on 109 routes with 151 modern trains. And such a move by the ministry has come after successful launch of India's first corporate train, which is known as the Tejas Express. Now, these two moves by the government of India are considered to be quite significant, and they can go a long way in ending the Indian Railways' monopoly on running the trains in India. However, this article is quite critical of the government's policy on the privatization of Indian Railways and has accordingly raised a number of concerns. Now, regarding the issue of privatization of railways and the present status of Indian Railways, we have already discussed in the DNS of 3rd July 2020. So you can go through this video to understand the basics of privatization of the Indian Railways and what are the problems that are affecting the Indian Railways which can be solved by privatizing the railways. And how would the PPP model of private trains would work in the railways, and what are the likely benefits for various stakeholders. However, what we will do in this discussion is that we will look at some of the concerns which have been raised by this article. So collectively, to understand the issue of privatization of railways, you should go through this DNS video and the additional points that we are going to discuss in this article. And that will complete the whole issue of privatization of the railways for you. Now, first concern that has been raised by this article is that of dual control and split responsibility in the functioning of railways if the private sector enters the functioning of railway. Now, under this model, the physical infrastructure such as the railway tracks, signaling, railway stations, etc. would still remain under the control of Indian Railways. And the private sector entities would be required to bring in their modern coaches to operate on specific routes. Now, under such a system, there is dual control and split responsibility over the railway infrastructure by both the private sector entities and the Ministry of Railways. So, in case of any event of unfortunate train accidents, it would be very difficult to fix the accountability on one single entity. And this is because still the physical infrastructure of railways would remain under the Ministry of Railways, while the coaches will be run by the private sector entities. So accordingly, it would be difficult to ensure or fix the accountability of any single entity in case of any untowardly accident. Second is the impact on the common man because of entry of private sector. Now, the private sector entities are expected to be given complete autonomy with respect to fixing the fares and provision of various other services such as catering, housekeeping, etc. and the government will have no role in fixing these passenger fares. So accordingly, the author argues that it can lead to drastic increase in the passenger fares, and this will make the train travel unaffordable to large sections of Indian society. So the author suggests that the railway should not be treated as mere transporter of goods and services, but it should also be treated as a social welfare organization, which it has been for the past 60 to 70 years in India. Further, the introduction of private sector is likely to have a very limited impact on the speed of the trains. Now, it is being claimed that the trains will be designed for a maximum speed of 160 kilometers to reduce the travel time. And the running time taken by a private train shall be comparable to or faster than the fastest train of Indian Railways, which are operating in the respective routes presently. However, the issue here is that most of the existing tracks are designed to support a maximum speed of up to 110 kilometers per hour only. So to increase the speed limit to 160 kilometers per hour, railways will have to spend a lot of money on the elimination of curves and level crossing gates and strengthening of the bridges. And this will be a very costly and time consuming effort. So although it is being claimed that the speed of these trains will be designed for a maximum speed of 160 kilometers per hour, it would be very difficult for the government of India to implement such a measure because it is costly and time consuming at the same time. So accordingly, the author has said that the government has already experimented with India's first corporate train in the form of Tejas Express. And under this, the physical infrastructure such as the locomotives, coaches, etc. would remain under the control of Indian Railways. However, various services such as ticketing, parceling, housekeeping, etc. are carried out through IRCTC, which is a subsidiary of the Indian Railways. And the IRCTC would be required to pay a certain pre-decided amount to the Indian Railways for the use of its physical infrastructure. So the author argues that instead of privatization of Indian Railways, the Ministry of Railways could use the experience gained with the launch of Tejas Express and entrust more number of trains to IRCTC, which has been done in the functioning of Tejas Express. And this would lead to unity of command in maintenance, operation and passenger services under the single administration of railways and its undertakings. So simply the author has argued in favor of entrusting more number of trains to the IRCTC, which is a subsidiary of the Indian Railways. So the issue of privatization of the railways from your exam point of view will be complete if you go through the DNS of 3rd July 2020 and also some of the critical points that have been mentioned in today's article. And combinedly, your topic of mains examination of the privatization of railways will be complete. With this, let's take up the next news article now. Now, the National Green Tribunal has pulled the central government on its submission that restriction on groundwater extraction would have an adverse impact on the industrial production, employment opportunities, and the GDP of some states. And in this, the National Green Tribunal has directed the Ministry of Jal Shakti and Central Groundwater Authority to ensure that no general permission is given without an environmental assessment of each and every activity. So, in the prelims perspective related to this news article, we will look at the powers and functions of the Central Groundwater Authority. And this can be important for us from the preliminary examination point of view under the topic General Issues on Environment and Ecology. So regarding the Central Groundwater Authority, you should note that it has been constituted under the Environmental Protection Act of 1986 to regulate and control development and management of groundwater resources in the India. So it states that it is a statutory authority which has been created under the Environmental Protection Act of 1986. Now, what are the powers and functions that have been conferred upon this authority by the Environmental Protection Act? Now, regarding the powers of the Central Groundwater Authority, it can resort to penal provisions which are contained in the sections of the Environmental Protection Act. Further, it can regulate and control management, development of groundwater, etc., and to issue necessary regulations in the directions for the purpose of management, control, and development of groundwater in India. So you can see that Central Groundwater Board is a statutory authority which has necessary powers which have been given to it by the Environmental Protection Act 1986 to regulate, control, and manage and the development of groundwater in India. Now, this article on page number 6 is related to the lynching issue that has happened in Assam. And this editorial points out to the breakdown of the rule of law which has been witnessed during the lynching of such people. So, in the DNS of 20th November 2019, we have discussed various aspects of the issue of mob lynching in detail. So, in today's description, you will find a link of this video so that you can revise the various aspects of lynching which are important for us from the General Studies paper 3 point of view under the topic security. Now, this article on page number 10 is in the form of an update on the previous ongoing issue which we have discussed in the DNS of 18th July 2020. And in that, we had learned that Iran had dropped India from the Chabahar rail project because of delays. However, Iran has now clarified that it would continue to work with India on the Chabahar line, and it has been said by the railway chief of Iran. So, accordingly, Iran's railway minister has said that Iran and India are determined to continue cooperation on the railway line. And these remarks contradict the Iranian officials who had previously said that India was not a part of the project. So, accordingly, this news is in the form of an update on this ongoing issue of the Chabahar port, which we have discussed in the detail in DNS of 18th July 2020, that is 3 to 4 days back. So, do go through these videos and revise the issue of Chabahar port, its strategic importance, and also update your notes with the latest update that Iran will continue to work with India on the Chabahar port, and it has been said by the Iranian railway minister. And with this, we conclude today's discussion. So let's take up the question for the day.